6 wounded men were waiting for a helicopter, and the number that mattered in the aircraft was 4. Now, before we go any farther, I want to be careful with that number, because Vietnam veterans will catch this faster than anybody. A later model UH-1 could be rigged to carry more than 4 litter patients. The book number and the field number were not always the same thing. Heat mattered, altitude mattered, fuel mattered. What else was in the cabin mattered, and if the medic needed room to actually reach a patient, that mattered too. That is where this story begins. Not with a chart showing what a Huey could carry, with 6 men on the ground and an aircraft crew trying to decide what it could safely carry right now. The closest clean record I found to the human problem behind this title comes out of the kind of Vietnam evacuation reports that are frustratingly short. They will give you a time, a unit, a number of wounded, sometimes a grid, and then move on. One line can say 6 wounded were waiting for Dustoff. Another document tells you what the aircraft was supposed to be capable of. A memoir tells you what crews actually found they could manage. Somewhere between those pieces is the part a medic and a crew chief had to live with. The medic on the ground had one problem. 6 men needed to leave. The crew chief at the door had another. The helicopter had to leave too. Those are not the same problem. If you served around Hueys, you already know why the cabin could become small in a hurry. It did not matter how roomy it looked in a photograph. Put in the crew, the medical gear, litters, straps, whatever fuel the aircraft needed for the leg, and then 4 men who could not simply sit where you told them to sit, and the open space disappeared. The crew chief was not looking at 6 names. He was looking at weight, balance, where the litters would go, whether the doors and cabin were still workable, and whether the aircraft had enough margin to get away from the pickup zone. The medic on the ground did not get to think like that first. His job started with the men. Army evacuation requests in Vietnam classified patients by urgency, and the language could sound neat on paper. Urgent, priority, routine. Out in the field, those words had to be attached to real people who might have been talking to you 10 minutes earlier. The medic had to decide who could wait and who probably could not. And this is the part I kept coming back to. The helicopter crew did not arrive with 6 empty seats and then become stingy with 2 of them. The problem was that 4 patients could consume almost the whole working cabin once they were loaded in, the way the crew believed the aircraft and the medic could handle. The Huey is so familiar now that it is easy to forget how much of Vietnam depended on small margins. A few hundred pounds, a little more fuel, a hotter afternoon, higher ground, 1 more man. The official Army history of Dustoff makes the point plainly. Early Hueys in hot, high conditions sometimes could not use anything close to their theoretical patient capacity. Later, D and H models improved that badly, but crews still had to deal with the aircraft they had, in the place they were, under the conditions of that pickup. That is why the decision did not belong to 1 man alone. The medic could tell the crew which casualties needed to move first. The pilot had the final responsibility for what the aircraft could safely lift, and the crew chief was the man physically standing where those 2 decisions met. He was the one seeing the cabin fill. 4 litters do not look like a number when they come through an open Huey door. They come in 1 at a time. Men at the edge of the landing area bring the first patient up. The crew chief and medic aboard take him, secure him, clear the doorway, then make room for the next. Rotor wash is throwing loose dirt and grass around the pickup area. Everybody has to lean in close because the aircraft is loud enough to erase normal conversation. The ground medic is trying to keep track of who has moved and who has not. The crew chief is counting space without needing to say the number out loud. 1, then 2, then 3. By the 4th, the cabin is no longer an empty aircraft. It is a treatment space that happens to be flying, and 2 wounded men are still outside. I want to put one question here for the men who actually did this work, because the records do not settle it the same way in every unit. If you loaded casualties from field pickups in Vietnam, what usually decided the last seat or litter position in your aircraft? The ground medic's priority, The flight medic's call, the aircraft commander's load limit, or some understanding between all of them. I am especially interested in where your unit differed from somebody else's, because I do not think there was one answer for every crew in every year. What makes the decision harder is that Leave 2 sounds colder than what it was. The 2 men who stayed were not rejected. They became the next problem. The ground medic still had them. That part of the story is easy to lose because the helicopter gets all the motion. It comes in, it loads, it leaves. Your eye follows the aircraft. The medic could not. He stayed with the men who did not go. That changes the whole scene. Once the Huey lifted, the ground did not become quiet. It became emptier. There were fewer wounded around him, but the 2 remaining men now knew the first aircraft had gone without them. We do not need invented dialogue to understand that. Anybody who has ever waited for an ambulance, a tow truck, a son coming home late, anything where time suddenly matters, knows what the eyes do. You watch the direction, the help disappeared. In Vietnam, another Huey was not a promise until you heard it or saw it. A unit could request another aircraft. Operations could launch one. A crew could say it was on the way. Then weather shifted. A different urgent call came in. An aircraft took a maintenance problem. A pickup zone became unsafe. Fuel changed the plan. Radio traffic became confused. None of those possibilities needed to happen for the men on the ground to think about them. So the medic's problem had changed again. At first, he had 6 men and not enough aircraft. Now he had 2 men and no aircraft at all. That is the tightening circle in a real evacuation. Options disappear one at a time. You begin with the idea that another helicopter can come. Then you learn how long that might take. You begin with the idea that the first aircraft can take everybody. Then the crew chief looks at the cabin, and the pilot looks at the aircraft, and that option is gone. You begin with the idea that the landing area will stay usable. Then, the longer you remain in one place, the less comfortable everybody becomes with that assumption. The ground medic is left doing something that does not make the photographs. He keeps the 2 men ready to move. No grand speech, no dramatic declaration, just work. He checks what he can check. He makes sure a bandage has not shifted. He listens to breathing. He watches whether a man who was alert is becoming less so. He keeps the litter team close enough that when the next aircraft appears, nobody wastes the first half-minute figuring out who goes where. And the crew chief in the departing Huey has his own version of waiting. The aircraft gets light on the skids and then climbs away. The 4 patients are aboard. The doorway that had been crowded with men loading is suddenly open to the outside again. The crew chief can look back toward the pickup area for only so long before the helicopter turns and the ground disappears behind terrain or distance. 2 men are still there. That is the part that makes this different from a normal story about Dustoff. The first lift is not the ending. It is the middle. A lot of Vietnam helicopter history is told from the cockpit because that is where the aircraft is controlled and where so many remarkable decisions were made. But casualty evacuation was also a back-of-the-aircraft job. The crew chief kept that machine working, watched the cabin, helped load, helped the medic when he could, and then went right back to being responsible for the aircraft the moment something sounded or felt wrong. Men who flew Hueys have told me, in one form or another, that a crew chief could know his aircraft in a way a passenger never would. A vibration that did not belong. A change in engine sound. Something loose in the cabin. A door, strap, litter, headset cord, or piece of equipment that had to be moved before it became somebody else's problem. With 4 patients aboard, he also had less room to move. The flight medic's problem was no easier. A helicopter cabin was not a hospital room. He had noise, vibration, limited reach, and a short flight in which the best thing he could sometimes do was keep a man stable enough to get through the next door. That is why practical capacity mattered more than brochure capacity. 6 litters might fit in a configuration. That did not mean 6 casualties in every condition should be packed into every aircraft. Colonel Ernest Knowles, one of the early Army medical aviation figures, later described that difference bluntly. He had fought for a 6-litter configuration, then learned in Vietnam that 3 or 4 litters plus walking wounded could be the better real-world load. That sentence tells you more about this story than a page of aircraft specifications. Because now, you can see the argument from both sides. The medic on the ground is thinking, there are 6. The crew chief is thinking, there is room to work with 4. Neither man is wrong. And there is one more thing that veterans will recognize here. The decision could change from one mission to the next. Same aircraft model, different afternoon. More fuel aboard because the next leg is longer. Less fuel because the pickup is close. Different elevation, different temperature, different mix of litter and ambulatory patients. A hoist installed. Extra equipment. A patient whose condition makes access more important. That is why I do not trust any telling of Vietnam that turns an aircraft limit into a permanent magic number. The men doing the work had to keep recalculating. And, if that sounds messy, good. The war was messy. The records are often cleaner than the work. There is a tendency, 50 years later, to turn Dustoff into one simple image. The unarmed Huey coming through fire because somebody was wounded. That happened, and the courage involved is real. But most of the hard decisions came after the aircraft arrived. Where can it actually put down? How long can it stay? Who is ready? Who is not? Who is most urgent? What can the aircraft lift from this ground under these conditions? Can the medic reach the man who may need him during the flight? And if 2 have to remain, what is the next aircraft? And how soon can it get back? There is no clean, heroic answer to any of that. There is only a sequence of smaller decisions that either works or does not. The first Huey takes 4. For the men aboard, the next few minutes are movement, vibration, engine noise, the crew leaning around litters, the aircraft turning toward a clearing station or hospital. For the 2 left behind, the next few minutes are stillness. That difference is hard to get out of my head. The same helicopter can mean rescue to one man and waiting to another in the same minute. And waiting was not passive. Units in Vietnam built their casualty evacuation system around speed because everybody understood that delay cost options. The entire reason Dustoff became such a trusted word was that crews kept coming when men on the ground needed them. The official histories are full of that stubbornness. Aircraft damaged and replaced. Crews refueling and going back. One pickup followed by another. A mission that should have been finished. Then another call coming in before the crew had fully reset. That matters here because the 2 men on the ground depended less on the capacity of the first Huey than on the reliability of the system behind it. Somebody had to launch another aircraft. Somebody had to return. That second trip is the real ending to a 4 for 6 problem. Not the first aircraft leaving, the return. When the next rotor sound reached the pickup area, the medic's job changed for the last time. The waiting stopped being open-ended. The litter team moved. The 2 men who had watched one helicopter leave now had another coming for them. The first crew might be the same crew returning after unloading and resetting, or it might be another aircraft already moving through the system. That varied by unit and situation, and the surviving records do not always identify the individual backseat men who made each lift. That is one of the reasons I dislike pretending the paperwork is more complete than it is. A flight log can give you an aircraft number. A unit journal can give you the casualty count. A hospital record can show when men arrived. A later oral history can tell you what somebody remembered. But the exact 30 seconds when a medic looked at 6 men and a crew chief looked at 4 workable positions may never have been written down. The decision still happened. It had to. And the men who did it probably did not think they were creating a story. They were trying to get the first 4 out and make sure the next 2 were still there when another Huey came back. That is why I wanted to tell this one without turning it into a lesson about triage or a lecture about helicopter specifications. The aircraft number matters only because it created a human choice. 4 can go. 6 need to go. The first 4 are loaded. The Huey leaves. And for a little while, 2 wounded men are still looking at an empty piece of sky. Then, another rotor beat comes back over the trees.